This Friday, from Disney, the musical movie event of the year arrives in theaters.
My name is Snow White.
Flawless. Exquisite.
Get tickets now.
Waiting on a wish.
Snow White will have you on your feet
I think that's a wonderful idea.
and cheering for more.
I was thinking the same thing.
Experience the magical story.
Magic mirror on the wall. Who's the fairest one of all?
Snow White.
Disney's Snow White. Only in theaters Friday. Rated PG. Parental guidance suggested. Tickets on sale now.
Today at T-Mobile, I'm joined by a special co-anchor.
What up, everybody? It's your boy, Big Snoop Deal Double G.
Snoop, where can people go to find great deals?
Head to T-Mobile.com and get 4 iPhone 16s with Apple Intelligence on us, plus 4 lines for $25.
That's quite a deal, Snoop. And when you switch to T-Mobile, you can save versus the other big guys' comparable plans plus streaming.
Respect. When we up out of here.
See how you can save on wireless and streaming versus the other big guys at T-Mobile.com/switch. Apple Intelligence requires iOS 18.1 or later.
This episode is brought to you by Prime Video. In the small town of Holland, Michigan, nothing is ever what it seems. Behind the tulip festivals and pretty houses lay dark secrets that threaten to tear a marriage apart. Nicole Kidman stars in this darkly twisted thriller about a wife and mother whose quest to uncover her husband's secrets may get her more than she bargained for. Holland, streaming on Prime Video March 27th.
Are your ulcerative colitis symptoms proving difficult to manage? Tremfya guselkumab can help you manage the cycle of UC symptoms. At 1 year, many patients taking Tremfya achieved clinical remission, and some patients also achieved endoscopic remission. Individual results may vary. Tremfya is a prescription medicine used to treat adults with moderately to severely active ulcerative colitis. Serious allergic reactions and increased risk of infections may occur. Before treatment, your doctor should check you for infections and TB. Tell your doctor if you have an infection, flu-like symptoms, or if you need a vaccine. Ask your doctor if Tremfya can help you manage the cycle of UC symptoms. Call 1-800-526-7736 to learn more, or visit tremfyaradio.com.
Hey there, Duke fans. Welcome to episode 707 of the DBR Podcast. If you're not sick of hearing my voice at this point, then I think you're stuck with me. I'm Jason Evans. I'm joined by Donald Wine. Donald and I have recorded, this will be the 4th podcast in the past 3 days. Right? I think that's correct, yeah?
I stopped counting. But yes, we're approaching double digits for the month of for this week. I think we're approaching double digits.
Yeah, exactly. We're actually getting this started a little later than necessary because I've had some terrible problems with my computer that appears to have left all its abilities in Charlotte. I'm now back in Atlanta. Had a nice drive. I survived the drive. Believe me, my eyes were drooping at times. It was not good. But I survived. And so now I'm having computer problems and all my notes are on a different computer. And so I'm going to be doing a lot of winging it. Luckily, I'm the host. And luckily, we have brought on an expert to help us discuss the NCAA Tournament bracket, which was released just a few hours ago. He is blushing as I call him an expert. It is Scott Rich. You know Scott well. He is our designated fill-in. And we decided that for the bracket reveal, we'd have a menage a trois, so to speak.
I love how last time I was on, I was 6th man. I've been upgraded from podcast 6th man to expert in the course of about a week. I'd say that's, now I'm most improved podcaster because that's a pretty big elevation over the span of a week. I'll take it.
I mean, you didn't win the award, but hang on. I don't know that you want this bump. He said menage a trois. I don't know that we're doing that. So I don't know if you want that title on your resume.
We are in 3 different cities. Any menaging will be very, very long distance.
And we're already off the rails.
Thank you. God bless you. Good night.
Yeah. In any event, we're here to talk about the bracket. And I just want to let people understand we're going to begin with the Duke Blue Devils, of course, in the East Regional, heading to Newark. We'll probably discuss some sort of general thoughts about how some teams were seeded, who got screwed, Michigan, Louisville. We'll be discussing a little bit of that and other general bracket comments. And then we're going to do a little game that I've set up. Each of us is going to pick the winner, the team we think will win each region. We will then pick the team that we think could be a surprise in that region. This needs to be a team seeded 5th or lower who makes at least the Great Eight. These are not necessarily like our picks written in stone, but like if a seed of 5th or lower is going to make the Elite Eight, we're telling you which one it is in each region. And last but not least, we will each pick a double-digit seed that we think can win 2 games. So that's sort of the game we're going to play a little bit later, but we're going to begin by talking about Duke versus the winner of American versus Mount St. Mary's. American and Mount St. Mary's playing like around 6:30, 7 o'clock or so on Wednesday, before the winner of that game will travel from Dayton to Raleigh to play the Blue Devils on Friday. Guys, by the way, one of the first things I've noticed is Duke's game. Like, I'm used to Duke playing in prime time. We're like at 2:50 in the afternoon. Now we're still on CBS, but like CBS for their primetime game, instead of picking Duke and Cooper Flag, I think they recognize a 1 versus a 16. The audience may not be tuning in for a long period of time.
Or CBS doesn't think Cooper's going to play, which I think is wrong. But that's my theory, because we've seen ESPN put really crappy Duke games in primetime on ABC or ESPN because of the Cooper Flag effect. I think that's what CBS is banking on, and I think they're wrong.
Yeah, I think they're wrong also. But in any event, the game in primetime that probably should have been Duke's spot is instead going to Kentucky and whoever the heck they're playing. Again, I don't have my notes the same way I thought I was going to. So, guys, let's get started. Donald, I'm going to come to you first. Give me your assessment of what Duke faces, the road we have, and you're only allowed to mention Jeremy Roach's name 3 times. That's the limit.
I get 3, or was it a total of 3?
No, you can get 3.
Just use what?
You can get 3. Yeah.
Well, I think the first thing, right, is so it's funny, right? We get the play-in 16s instead of a team that we get to scout for 4 days. So we only have less than 48 hours to scout whoever wins that first 4 game, which is
Donald,
not necessarily.
Hold on. The fallacy in that is you think Duke's only scouting one of these teams. Believe me.
No. What I mean,
we're doing plenty of scouting of both of them, and then we'll just throw away. Half the work will be thrown away, and that's life.
I get it. But what I'm saying is you don't know who your opponent is until less than 48 hours before. That is, it's not necessarily a huge challenge, but again, it's something to note. I think the one thing that you look at is Mississippi State, fairly strong, right? The SEC got 14 teams in. They've been overhyping the SEC and all of their teams, but Mississippi State is pretty decent, and they got a guy who can shoot the ball. But, of course, you have Baylor in that 9th spot, and if Baylor gets through, this is the storyline that probably the CBS and the NCAA want, right? Jeremy Roach playing against Duke in the second round. I don't know that I'm betting on it to happen or picking it to happen, but it's definitely something that will be a storyline if that gets to that point. I'm looking at the 5-4. Of course, Arizona, we saw earlier in the year, we beat them in Tucson, and Oregon, decent team. But when I look at the main part of this bracket, I don't want to say it doesn't scare me, but it seems pretty fair, right? It's not the strongest bracket. It's not the weakest bracket. All these teams are pretty decent, but there's no team that is unbeatable. And for us, I think we got to play our A game. And of course, getting Cooper Flag back, or even in the Sweet 16 Elite 8, if Malik Brown could be healthy for those games, that would be a big boost. But I'm looking at this bracket and saying, hey, Alabama's strong, but they're not untouchable. They can be beat. St. Mary's, decent squad, but they can be beat. Wisconsin just got beat by Michigan in the Big Ten final today. So
not
there's
that
no
that
team
meant anything to the committee.
We'll talk about it. We'll talk about it. But yeah, I'm looking at this and I'm saying it's a pretty fair bracket, and it's not one where I would say that we got the short end of the stick.
Yeah, I like Duke's draw as well. It's worth noting that Alabama could be missing Grant Nelson. Should they, looking all the way down the line to the Elite 8, if Alabama makes it there, it's possible that Grant Nelson is currently injured, and it's sort of, his timeline is sort of uncertain. There's some talk that it could be a fairly serious injury. And as a result, that would really impact the best version of Alabama is a version of Alabama that has Grant Nelson really, producing big from the power forward and center position for them. No, I like the bracket for Duke. Scott, what do you? In fact, I'll say I think it might be the easiest bracket. I mean, like as I look across at the other like fours and stuff like that, I think Arizona is the worst of those fours. Duke at least avoided. Everyone was talking about Duke was going to maybe get UConn. We avoided that. Everyone's talking about, we would maybe get Gonzaga. We avoided both of those. I mean, there's a lot of storylines in the Baylor potential matchup, but not like if we had UConn or Gonzaga, don't you think, Scott?
Yeah. So on paper, this is the easiest bracket in terms of top four by the NCAA's seed list. This is something, if you look at the bracketing principles, they have this thing where they can reorganize the brackets and go against location preference if there's a huge difference between the total seed number in the top four in each bracket. Duke's bracket, the East and the West, have a total seed number of 36. So again, you add up the raw seed, not is it the one seeder, but what's the overall seed. Duke bracket is a 36 because Alabama was the second best 2 seed, Wisconsin was the worst 3 seed, Arizona was the worst 4 seed, according to the NCAA's 1 through 68 seed list. That bodes well for Duke. I think on paper, I agree with you that the teams I didn't want to see in that 8-9 matchup were Gonzaga and were UConn. I think that Baylor is, a close third on that list just in terms of pure talent. That's a talent level team you expect to play in the Sweet 16. Obviously, the performance hasn't been there this year. I will say I don't love the prospect of facing Arizona again. The one thing that I don't love about this bracket, I think the bottom half of our bracket is fine. No one scares me a ton that we might face in the Elite Eight. But I think playing Arizona in the Sweet 16 is a potential sneaky matchup because it's always hard to beat a team twice in a rematch. I think Arizona is a much better team now than they were when we played them before. But also, I would have rather played any other of the 4 seeds just based on the eye test. Based on the eye test, Maryland and Purdue, I think, are, probably prime upset candidates. Both of those teams are, I'm not a huge fan of the Big Ten quality this year, despite my Michigan allegiance. I think that those teams are a little bit overseeded potentially. And Texas A&M is a team that just lost their first matchup in the SEC tournament to Texas. So of the 4 seeds, despite Arizona being lowest on the NCAA seed list, they were the one I was probably least happy to see. Again, a lot of things have to happen before we face Arizona in Sweet 16. That's the one that I'd have to pick. Otherwise, I agree with you. I think as a whole, Duke got a good draw.
Look, you're right about Arizona earlier in the year. There was a moment earlier in the season when Arizona looked like they were, a top 10 kind of team. They've lost 6 of their past 11 games. This is a team that's limping into the tournament to some extent. Now they had a fairly nice Big 12 tournament, and they gave Houston a competitive game in the semifinals, and Houston's really, really, really good. But I don't know that, I'm not looking at Arizona and saying, I'm just seeing a team that Duke's already played. We played them once at their place when we were not as good as we are now, and we took care of them. And they don't strike me as a team that's gotten a lot better over the course of the season. In fact, I think they've gotten a little bit worse.
And keep in mind, guys that we have been playing a lot of lately, Slim, Big Pat, they did not play a second against Arizona when we played them over at their house.
Guys, if it's okay with you, let's kind of move on to the other ACC teams very quickly, because eventually we're going to take a little break, and then we're going to do my little game, and we're going to discuss the women's bracket, on the back half of this episode. But talk to me, Scott. I'll come to you first. What do you think of the ACC getting 4, Carolina getting into the field? Every bracketologist I haven't double checked this. There cannot be a bracketologist out there that got the entire field right this year, because there are several teams, North Carolina among them, that people are just like, how did that happen?
So I think the committee has set a very dangerous precedent this year. I think the committee has set a precedent with some of the choices they made in the at-large teams, and also some of the seeding choices, that it doesn't matter if you actually win the games. It matters who you play and how those games end up looking analytically. I think North Carolina is obviously the outlier in that metric where, again, yes, they played a lot of good teams in the non-conference. Those games, especially since they were sort of, close raw scores at the end, a lot of those were crazy UNC comebacks like what we faced on Friday. That looked good in the metrics, and that inflated things like their net, like their Ken Pom, like their wins above bubble, things like that. But you have to win the games. At a certain point, who you beat matters. I think that shows up a little bit with Louisville and the fact that they're underseeded, the fact that they went 18-2 in the ACC, got no respect. I think a lot of people would think that Clemson is underseeded as a 5, but I think this was a general trend from the committee. The committee said that the fact that Auburn lost 3 of their last 4 didn't really matter. They were sort of locked into the top number 1 seed overall. The committee said that the fact that Michigan beat Wisconsin twice this year, including today, but also on the road earlier this year, that didn't matter. Michigan was a 5, Wisconsin was a 3. They showed in their choices that winning the games, especially winning the games in the conference tournament, didn't really change all that much. If it did, you wouldn't see UNC in the field. You would have seen, I think Texas probably had, a good claim. I didn't have a problem with that, but I thought Texas and Boise State would have been in instead of UNC, again, based off the fact that Boise State had a very strong tournament showing. It's weird. And I was talking with this is a big swing to take, but this is one trend. This wasn't the case last year. If this ends up being a trend, if this happens next year again, people are going to start having the conversation of how much do conference tournaments matter. And if there's another injury, if a Cooper Flag-esque type guy gets injured again in the conference tournaments the next year, and the selection committee follows this precedent, I'm worried we're going to start getting bowl game style holding players out of conference tournaments. We're not there yet. We're not there yet by a long shot. One data point does not make a trend. But this data point is so much of an outlier that I really hope that there's some self-correction between now and next Selection Sunday. Otherwise, there's going to be some interesting adjustments.
Donald, I don't think a single one of the conference tournament winners, maybe Florida. I don't know. Was Florida not a number 1 seed coming into the SEC tourney, and now they're number 1? But I don't think a single one of the major conference tournament winners got any seeding benefit from winning their conference. Do you agree?
I mean, I have to look through all the qualifiers, but for the big conferences, I mean, Florida was locked into the 1 before. I'm sorry, I shouldn't say locked. They were the number 1 seed, listed as the 1 seed entering the SEC tournament, the 4th number 1 seed based on their regular season, and as the second, I think they were the 2nd seed in the SEC, so they were locked into that 4. So they didn't necessarily need the bump, right? But
I'm wondering, like let's say, guys, let's say Tennessee had beaten Florida today in the SEC championship. Do you think Tennessee gets that 4th number 1 seed? I don't. I think Florida. My point is, I think that they didn't care.
Here's the best data point for that.
Yeah,
the best data point for that is St. John's won the Big East. Michigan State lost in the Big Ten semifinals. Entering the weekend, the consensus was that Michigan State was probably a touch ahead of St. John's on the 2 line. On the raw numbers, Michigan State was a number 7 overall seed. St. John's was a number 8 overall seed. The fact that St. John's won the Big East tournament and Michigan State lost in the Big Ten semifinals did nothing to affect their relative ordering on the 2 line, which actually makes a difference because that was sort of the difference in location preference and who got sent out west, which was St. John's.
So I was going to say that with these tournaments, I think you're right in the fact that a lot of them didn't matter, but I promise you the SEC one would have. If Tennessee had beaten Florida today, Tennessee's on that 1 line because as it looks, they were the strongest 2 seed. And basically what it came down to was the winner of that game was getting that 4th number 1 seed. It was always slated to be Florida based on the regular season performance and the fact that they finished above Tennessee. But if Tennessee had beaten them today, they would have given them the 1 seed because that's what they were doing. They were trying to angle a way to get 14 SEC teams into the NCAA tournament. That has been if you've watched ESPN at all this week, That is all they have been talking about. They had the big game day crew at the SEC tournament. Every game was on ESPN. They had the commissioner on every single day on SportsCenter and after games to tell you about how they needed 14 teams in. That is a money thing. They're going to get $28 million because they got 14 teams into the NCAA tournament. Now, the one thing that I think this is not a trend. This is barely an outlier. I don't even call it that. This is what we call the Bubba Cunningham effect. Who was Bubba Cunningham? He is the athletic director for the University of North Carolina, who just so happens to be the chair of the selection committee. There is a reason, and of course they say they when they do the selection show every year, they bring on the chair by himself to answer questions, the hard questions about who makes the dance and who doesn't. This year, they had to bring on Vice Chair Keith Gill, who is the Sun Belt commissioner, because UNC was the number one question. How the hell did they get in with a 1-12 record against quad one teams? And I think at the end of the day, they can talk all they want about how he had to leave the room and wasn't in the room when they discussed UNC. But they have to answer the question of how UNC got into this field as a play-in team when you had Indiana, who had more quad one wins, had a slightly better record, and again in the Big Ten, most people consider the Big Ten to be a better conference this year than the ACC. There's only comes down to one thing. Bubba Cunningham set these rules. We should not treat this as a trend. We should not treat this as a precedent. We should treat this as what it is. But the other thing I think people are missing is that this year there were not a lot of upsets in the conference tournaments. Not a lot of bubble busters like we were last year.
There were not
like five or
bid
six
stealers. There were not bid stealers.
Yeah, bid stealers. There was like 5 or 6 last year, where including NC
there were like
State.
2 right? This year, I think. Yeah.
I think they said 1. I think they said Colorado State, Trip Boise State, and there might be one other that you can call. But I think at the end of the day, they basically said, okay, and I think they even said if Boise State had won, then UNC.
No, if UAB had beat Memphis, then UNC.
I'm sorry, yes, UAB.
UNC was the last team in.
Was the very last team in, and they said that was what was going to happen. And Memphis won, UNC is in. But at the end of the day, I don't think they fully answer the question of how we got to the point where they consider UNC, who has not beaten anyone of note other than UCLA, how they are considered one of the teams that should be in this dance over teams that have beaten those teams if they've played all year long.
All right, so Scott, let me just ask you a question. I don't want long. It's clear Donald thinks UNC did not deserve to be in the field. Do you agree with him?
Yeah, I think that Indiana had a better record, had a better resume. Excuse me. By the way, they're also a big name. So if you're saying that UNC got in for the ratings for the big names, Indiana would also have drawn just as big ratings in the first 4.
Okay,
I think Boise State was the team that got screwed. I think Boise State was the team that should have been in, based on the fact that the Mountain West is always an underrated, underserved conference. The fact that they were already on the bubble and made it to the conference tournament game in the Mountain West, I thought that should have been rewarded.
All right, so I'm going to make a case for UNC right now. If Carolina did not make this field, they would be the highest ranked team in KenPom to not be in the tournament. In fact, by several spots, they're 33rd in KenPom. And similarly, I don't have the net right in front of me, but if you look at
35th in a net.
Yeah. So that's a spot where teams usually make it. What's more, every single one of the 10 seeds, the 10s, not even the 11s, the 10s is lower rated in the advanced metrics than Carolina is. What's more, of the 6-11 seeds, only one of them, Virginia Commonwealth, VCU, is the only 11 seed that is ranked higher than Carolina. If you look at the analytics, Carolina actually is a really good team that just couldn't find a way to win down the stretch. They lost to Kansas by 3. They lost to Michigan State in overtime by 3. They lost the game to Duke the other day. Really close game. They had a number of close contests against really good teams that they just couldn't quite pull out. Scott, you are right. Winning does matter. But North Carolina probably showed they're better than what their record was this year. And I don't think anyone would be crazy if they were like, I think Carolina could go on a little run here and maybe make some noise in the NCAA tournament. Do you guys think I'm crazy?
Yes. I mean, not necessarily crazy, but But no, look, if they had not gotten to the tournament, you're right. They'd have the highest net rating to never get into the tournament. But as it stands right now, they are the team that is in the tournament with the worst record against the quad one teams ever among power conferences in the history of the NCAA tournament. So you even have that. But again, at the end of the day, yeah, we talk about teams who don't play those games. They don't load up their schedule, and they get punished for it. And basically what they're saying right now, and I agree with Scott in this matter, they say, hey, look, if you line up a huge schedule and beat none of them, then that's cool. We'll find a way to overlook it. But I think
but you need to be really competitive with them. That's what Carolina
competitive
was.
Don't pay the bills, Jason. Wins do. And that's the idea about
the analytics.
Tournament.
It kind of does. Yeah. All right, guys, really quick, I just want to quickly ask you guys, do you think the ACC's perception of weakness, the fact that we had 14 teams that were basically trash, that were not even under consideration for the NCAA tournament, no offense to SMU, do you think that is the reason why, with the exception of North Carolina, I feel like every single other ACC team was probably downgraded a little bit? Duke's the overall number 2. I think everyone thinks from a resume, from the standpoint of performance, winning the damn ACC tournament without Cooper Flagg, that Duke probably should have been the overall number 1. Clemson's a 5, and everyone's like, how, Clemson's like practically in the top 10. How are they a 5? Louisville's an 8, made the ACC finals, won 21 of their final 23 games of the season.
13th in the last poll.
Yeah, and they're an 8 seed. Is this because of the conference, or is it because of something else?
So here's the thing. Here's the thing about those analytic metrics. They are a self-fulfilling prophecy. As soon as the analytics get sort of set in stone after the non-conference season, and you guys have talked about this, we talk about this on the message boards all the time, that once your conference's perspective is gotten set in stone by the non-conference, you cannot shake that. As soon as the ACC was deemed weak, not only by the eye test, but also by the net in the non-conference, the writing was on the wall. It was done. Duke didn't have the Q1 opportunities. North Carolina didn't have the Q1 opportunities. It was more of survival rather than I can improve my resume. I think it's going to be really, really interesting to see how the SEC actually does in the tournament. I think, Jay Billis says a bunch of things. One of the things I disagree with wholeheartedly was he was saying that if the SEC doesn't do well in the tournament, that doesn't necessarily say that this historic SEC season didn't mean what it meant. I call BS on that. If the SEC is the best, most incredible conference that we've ever seen, which is what everyone has been saying, what 14 teams in the tournament says, they better show that in the tournament.
When we last heard this, it's like the game of the century. We hear the word game of the century. There's a game of the century every year, right? Last time we heard this was a couple years ago when the Big 10 got 11 teams in.
Yeah.
And how many of them made it out of the first weekend? 1.
Yeah, I was going to say their record was abysmally bad. Now, I don't think the SEC, that's not going to happen in the SEC. Not because I think the SEC is so great, but the SEC is so highly
They have matchups where
seeded.
They can play each other in the second round where someone has to win.
Well, but the other thing is they're so highly seeded that SEC teams are taking on 14s, 15s, and 16s for the most part. The notion that they're going to have a lot of upsets, I think, probably doesn't hold water. Guys, any other general comments, or should we take a quick break and then come back and play my little game with each one of these regions?
I have more general comments, so let's take a break and talk about them.
All right. We're going to have that. We're also going to talk about the women's bracket after this quick commercial break.
Who's scoring big in the NBA this season? You are. With all the new ways to get in on the last month of action at DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NBA.
Boy, that's right, Duke fans. From Zion Williamson rocking the rim to Jason Tatum draining threes, or Tyus and Trey Jones dishing out those assists. Get behind your favorite players and the prop bets you can make on DraftKings to keep things entertaining.
So take it to the rack with DraftKings Sportsbook. Every point counts. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and use code DukeBB. Yes, that's code DukeBB for new customers to get $150 in bonus bets when you bet just $5. Only on DraftKings. The crown is yours.
Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. In New York, call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369. In Connecticut, help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org. Please play responsibly. On behalf of Boot Hill Casino and Resort in Kansas, 21 and over, age and eligibility varies by jurisdiction. Void in Ontario. Bonus bets expire 168 hours after issuance. For additional terms and responsible gaming resources, see dkng.co/audio.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Commercial Insurance. Business owners, meet Progressive Insurance. They make it easy to get discounts on commercial auto insurance and find coverages to grow with your business. Quote in as little as 6 minutes at progressivecommercial.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company. Coverage provided and serviced by affiliated and third-party insurers. Discounts and coverage selections not available in all states or situations.
Halliday presents, in the red corner, the undisputed, undefeated Weed Whacker Guy. Champion of hurling grass and pollen everywhere. And in the blue corner, the challenger, extra strength, Halliday. Eye drops that work all day to prevent the release of histamines that cause itchy allergy eyes. And the winner by knockout is Halliday. Halliday, bring it on.
Today, the beverage aisle looks a lot different than it used to. America's beverage companies are working together. We're delivering the options everyone wants. In fact, nearly 60% of beverages Americans buy have zero sugar. You'll find more variety than ever, including more of your favorites, now available with zero sugar. You'll also find more sizes and clear calorie information on the front of every can, bottle, and pack. We know when it comes to finding balance, the more choices, the better.
Experience a progressive lens engineered with AI from Essilor, powered by individual measurements of your visual behavior. A lens personalized to you by an Essilor expert. Discover Verilux XR Track and enjoy instantly sharp vision in motion and seamless transitions from near to far. Find your local Essilor expert today at Essilor.com.
All right, gentlemen, time to play my little game. As a reminder, who's going to win the bracket? Who is a, slightly lower seeded team, 5 or lower, who could win the bracket, and who is a double-digit seed that you think could make it to the Sweet 16. Let us start with the toughest region to pick, the East region. Scott,
so many choices.
Yeah, Scott, who's going to win the East?
Duke.
Oh, going out on a limb there, my friend. Donald.
Big swing from the guest host.
Donald, who's going to win the East?
I like Scott's pick. I think that's a good pick. I'm gonna piggyback off Scott.
It's a menage a Duke. I also believe that the Blue Devils will win the East.
You menages today. You drove back from Charlotte. I don't know what happened on the road, but
I've been alone in a hotel room for 3 days. Oh, my wife is going to have a bad night. Okay. I will go first on the lower seeded team that could surprise and reach the Sweet 16. I'm going to take BYU. They are a 6 seed. I really like the Cougars. They've been playing really well down the stretch. And I feel like this is a team that they're experienced and they're just itching. They're just waiting to get AJ Dybance on that team next year. And I think the current guys on that team are sort of like, hey, wait, we're actually pretty good. This is a team that has showed out really well in the past 6 weeks or so in the Big 12. So I like BYU as my lower seeded team that could surprise and reach all the way up to the Elite Eight. Donald, what is your sleeper team, so to speak?
I like BYU, but I'm going to go with St. Mary's because in a West Coast conference where the entire season everyone was talking about how great Gonzaga was, the metrics show Gonzaga being in the top 10 all season long. St. Mary's actually won that conference. They may have lost the conference tournament, but they were 3 games clear of Gonzaga in the regular season. They may be a sleeper pick.
Scott?
I'm on the same wavelength. I'm in my current bracket, which will undergo much tweaking over the next few days.
Yeah,
I have St. Mary's making it to the Elite Eight. That's one of my big swings. I think that they're a team that gets underrated because of the West Coast Conference. If you blind swap resumes, and you say that St. Mary's has Gonzaga. You put Gonzaga's name on St. Mary's resume. I think they're a top 4, top 5 seed. I think they're a good team. They beat Gonzaga twice during the regular season. It's really hard to beat teams 3 times, as we found out on Friday, holding on by the skin of our teeth. I don't think you can hold that against St. Mary's that much. I think that they are a prime example of an underseeded team, and also a team that gets a nice draw, potentially against a banged up Alabama in the second round, potentially against a not so great Wisconsin team in the third round, a team that always seems to struggle in the tournament. I think they have a really nice path to making a run.
Okay, so now it's time for us to talk about our double-digit seed that we think could make the Sweet 16. Scott mentioned the notion that Wisconsin struggles in the tournament. That's what I'm relying on. It seems crazy after I picked BYU to be a surprise team, but I think Virginia Commonwealth, the 11 seed that plays BYU, if they get past BYU, I like them to maybe make it to that second weekend and get past Wisconsin. So VCU, the 11 seed in the East, is my sleeper to make the Sweet 16. I know that makes no sense with me also taking BYU. That's just how I roll. Scott, what do you got for a double digit?
I'm on the same wavelength, but I'm actually probably going to pick VCU and actually have some cojones here and go with my underdog and actually pick them in my bracket. I think one of the interesting things, you look at BYU and VCU, they're very similar teams. They're both teams that play 4-guard lineups. They're both teams that don't have a huge amount of size. So I think that in terms of a matchup, BYU is probably not all that happy because they don't have a bigger, slower team that they can sort of, take advantage of in their 3-point shooting expertise. VCU is also a team that has some really talented guys. VCU seems to be a place that high major talent, down transfers down. Zeb Jackson was a guy who played pretty darn well at Michigan for a couple of years before going to VCU, along with the Juwan Howard exodus and all that nonsense. I think VCU is a really talented team. I think that I agree with you. I think that they have a real good chance at making some noise.
Donald, who's your double digit pick?
Liberty, 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 Liberty.
I like it.
That's it.
Taking out Oregon and then Arizona, huh?
Just stated with no context. You're just going to go with that, and we're going to move on.
Going to go with that.
I just wanted to do. How much is Liberty paying you guys? What's the NIL for that?
They need to pay me for as much money as I give them for my car insurance. So,
gentlemen, let's move down to the Midwest Regional. Houston, the number 1 seed there. Donald, I'll go to you first. Who is winning the Midwest?
I got Houston right now. They're really strong, as you mentioned, and it's hard to pick against them.
Scott?
I'm going with Tennessee. I think every year, almost every year, there's one number 1 seed that doesn't make it to the second weekend. I think that's Houston this year, and I think it's because of the potential matchup with Gonzaga, a top 10 talented team that just didn't have that. If you talk about analytics, you talk about UNC making it because of the analytics say Gonzaga is still a top 10 team. I think Houston is not happy with the way this bracket turned for them. And assuming Gonzaga wins their first game, I think they're going to take Houston out in the second round.
I have to tell you, there are a lot of regions where I probably would pick Tennessee. I like a team that has a great point guard, and Zakai Ziegler may be the best point guard in the entire NCAA right now. I like teams that play really hard defense, which Tennessee absolutely does. But putting them with Houston, I've got to go with the Cougars. I think this is really their year. They've been beating good teams by big numbers in recent weeks, and that's a scary kind of combination. So that's the team I think is going to win. Scott, why don't you go ahead and tell me which 5 seed or lower you think could make the Elite 8, perhaps?
I think Clemson. I think you can say ACC bias all you want, but I think that Clemson has looked great down the stretch. They lost to Louisville by the skin of their teeth. And I think, again, if you look at the matchups, Purdue is a team that doesn't scare me in the second round. Purdue is a team that I thought, as a Michigan fan, I thought was a very so-so basketball team coming into this weekend. Michigan dismantled Purdue. And then potentially, if things go according to plan, I think that they might get lucky and avoid Houston in the Sweet 16 because of that matchup. I think Clemson is much better than that 5 seed, and I think that they're going to show it for the ACC.
Donald, how about you? Who's your 5 seed or lower?
It's interesting, but I'm not necessarily super high on them, but Illinois could scare some people. Since they played us and we destroyed them, I don't know if we flipped a switch in them, but they played well down the stretch. I know they didn't get uh, too far in the Big Ten tournament, but those last few regular season games after we played them, they showed some moxie, and that's what you need in an NCAA tournament.
I'm with Scott on this one. I really like Clemson to maybe make a little bit of a run here. And I actually think Clemson and Houston, if that is what comes to pass, and I think it's pretty likely that is what we'll see in the Sweet 16, that I think that's a tough matchup for Houston. Clemson is a team, if you line those two teams up, like the Ian Shefflin guarding Juwan Roberts, LJ Cryer having to go against Jaden Zachary. Clemson's actually got some guys who can cause problems for you if you're a Houston club, and I think that could be a really interesting matchup. All right, now we go to the double-digit seeds. Scott, I'll go to you first. Who's your double-digit in the Midwest that you think could make the second round, or the Sweet 16?
I'm going to take my stance against Donald here. I think it's whoever wins Texas versus Xavier, and I think solely because Illinois is such a Jekyll and Hyde team, I think they're primed for an upset. You said that they were great since they lost to Duke. That's true. But then they got absolutely embarrassed. They didn't just drop out of the Big Ten tournament early. They got walloped by Maryland. The final score was a 23-point margin of victory. They were down 32 with 12 minutes to go in that game. That was a game that was not as close as it looked, and didn't look all that close either. I think that they're a team that is just so Jekyll and Hyde that if you want to pick an upset, you pick a team that can have that bad of an off night. So I'm going with them, and I think whoever wins that game probably plays a Kentucky team that, again, is walking wounded. No Jackson Robinson, potentially no Lamont Butler, and a team that also didn't look good down the stretch.
So, Donald, before you go, I'm going to say the exact same thing. The winner of that Texas Xavier matchup, first of all, I really like them against Illinois. I'm with you. I think Illinois struggled, and Kentucky is just half their team's in the hospital. I think that is a prime spot for an 11 seed to make the Sweet 16. What do you say, Donald?
And it's a smart pick because I believe in 12 of the 13 tournaments since we've expanded to 68, someone who plays in the first four gets out of the first weekend, I think is that what it is, or at least makes the second round. So it's a solid pick. It's funny. The team that I have has been a team that has been kind of lighting up on social media and has been a team that people have decided is the team, America's team. McNeese, come on down. Joe Dumars' alma mater. Shout out to the Pistons. But McNeese is a really good team, and if you've watched them play, they got some dogs on that team. I know Clemson is not happy to have them as their 12.
All right, let's go to the other side of the bracket. We'll start with the South Regional, where Auburn is the number 1 seed, where Michigan State is the number 2. And Donald, I'll go to you first. Who do you think is going to win that bracket?
I got Michigan State. They're still a strong team, and I think they match up well with a lot of teams on the bottom half of their bracket. I would love to put Michigan in this category, but as Scott will opine very much soon, Michigan got screwed in this bracket here. But I think at the end, Michigan State has a really good line for them to get to the Final Four.
Scott, what do you say?
I'm going chalk. I'm sticking Auburn. I think that Auburn got a pretty good draw. I'm actually going to take the opposite, argument to Donald in a whole bit and tell you why I think Michigan State's going down early. And I also think they got a big break by the injury to, I forget his name, the Iowa State guard, who's now out. Basically, the bottom half of that bracket, whoever Auburn is going to play in the Elite Eight, is probably going to be a team that's struggling in some way or another. I think Auburn's too much, and they make it.
Yeah, I know we were talking earlier about, which bracket is easiest and all that other kind of stuff. I was looking forward to having someone I could pick against Auburn. And then I looked down this bracket and I was like, well, I'm not going to take Michigan State to beat them. I'm not going to take, Iowa State. Definitely not going to take Iowa State, a team who's struggled. I actually think the toughest road for Auburn may be facing a Texas A&M club that did beat them fairly recently. Potentially in the Sweet 16 should Texas A&M get there. But I like Auburn to come out of that bracket out of the South. Let's go to the sort of lower seeded team that we think could make some waves. I'll go first. I'm gonna say Marquette. I think the Big East hasn't gotten a lot of respect in this field. I've seen Marquette play a little bit, and I like them. They got a really, really nice guard in Kai Jones, and I'm not a believer really in Michigan State. Marquette as a 7 seed, the bottom half of that bracket I think is wide open. If you want to tell me you think Ole Miss, Marquette, there are a number of teams down there that could really make waves, and the one I'm picking is Marquette. Scott?
I'm going to go against you here. I think it's New Mexico. I think it's Marquette's opponent in the first round. I think that they have an under-the-radar, potential star in Donovan Dent, a guy who's averaging 20 points a game, who's shooting beyond 40% plus from three. Those, mid-major guys who profile like that tend to explode onto the scene. Marquette really struggled down the stretch in the Big East, and the Big East was not that good this year. I think, the Big East got a lot of benefit of the doubt from UConn's brand name, from St. John's making a streak. But watching some Big East basketball being in stores, I have not been impressed by the quality of basketball in the Big East, including UConn. I think that Marquette's a team that struggled down the stretch in the Big East, and for me, that's a big red flag.
Donald, what do you say?
Yeah, I very quickly on Marquette, I saw Marquette play live here in DC, and while they are a really good team, they are very streaky from beyond the arc, and they allow teams to get back in the game. So watch out for that. Guys, the team I'm going with is Louisville. I mean, we saw Louisville play. First of all, we just talked about the fact that they're severely underseeded, and they're not going to be scared of Auburn, right? They just went toe-to-toe with the number 1 team in the country, and, for 30 minutes of the game, 35 minutes of the game, and ended up having a very respectable loss. Only team that really beat them twice. I think they will not be scared of Auburn, especially the way Auburn has been playing lately. If Auburn gets into this funk where they are not scoring, Louisville can take advantage of that. And so I see them potentially making a big run.
All right, guys, it's time for us to name our double-digit seed that we think can make the Sweet 16. Scott, you kind of already did it with New Mexico, didn't you?
Yeah, I'm picking New Mexico to beat Michigan State in the second round, and I think that Michigan State is a team that is going to make a lot of people seem silly. There's the trendy pick right now to make the Final Four out of that region. Michigan State can't shoot. And when I say they can't shoot, I don't mean, they're an average shooting team. I mean, they are one of the worst shooting teams in the country. They won the Big Ten despite being worst in the Big Ten from beyond the arc. They shoot 30% from three. They win because they're Tom Izzo grinded out. They're a great defensive team. They're deep. They go 10 deep. But if they don't make shots, if they can't score, who are they going to beat? I think they're going to squeak by, they're going to beat to 15, but I think whoever it is, Marquette or New Mexico, I think they take down Michigan State because those are the teams that profile as upset targets, the teams that can go cold and lose. And by the way, Michigan State's, let me put my Michigan homer hat on for just 5 seconds here. Michigan State's been coasting on that one national championship for a long time.
25 years.
The idea that Tom Izzo is this March magician has not been true for at least a decade. Since the 2015-2016 season, Michigan State they made it to one Final Four. They made it to the Final Four in 2019. Every other tournament, they lost in the first round. They lost in the second round twice. They lost in the first round again. They lost in the second round again. They made it to one Sweet 16 in 2023, but they haven't made it out of there. I just butchered that massively. It's late at night on a Sunday, everyone. They have only made it out of the first weekend twice since 2016, is what I meant to say the first time around. That is not a coach that is some March magician. That is a coach that's running on fumes.
All right. Interesting pick. I'm going to tell you the team that I think, the double-digit seed that I think could make the Sweet 16 is the North Carolina Tar Heels, the winner of that North Carolina-San Diego State game. I really like that the winner of that game over Ole Miss. I know the SEC is really good, but I don't think Ole Miss is all that special. And then we've talked about the fact that Iowa State is a team that struggled down the stretch. They looked really good earlier in the year. They've not seemed the same in the past month or so. So I know I'm going to get accused of being a Carolina homer for doing this, but I think North Carolina or San Diego State could be the team that makes it out. All right, makes it to the Sweet 16, I should say. Last region.
Wait, you haven't got my pick.
Oh, I didn't? I'm so sorry.
I butchered that so badly, we assumed Donald talk, and I actually just took up way too much time.
There you go.
I'll be quick. Mine's Yale. If there's a SEC team that I think is ripe for the fall, and having watched a lot of the SEC, don't scare me, it's Texas A&M. Shout out Henry Coleman III, but Yale is a team that is very scary, and they could pick off A&M.
Wow. I did not expect Yale to be your pick. But we've seen Ivy teams. Cornell did it a few years ago. We've seen Ivy teams.
Yale did it.
Yale did it last year.
Yeah.
And Yale did it in the first round. Remember, it was a couple years ago. I believe it was 2019 where we saw them in the second round, and they were the trendy pick to go to the Sweet 16, and we had to fight to beat them because they had that one guy who was hitting a bunch of threes. But yeah, Yale.
If those Ivies ever agree to start actually paying NIL to their players, they could be really good.
Want this high quality education and some money?
Yeah, exactly. All right, now let's get down to the West Regional. Florida, the number 1 seed. Trendy St. John's as the number 2. Who's going to come out of that bracket? I'll go first. I'm sorry. The Florida Gators are playing really good basketball right now. You would be a little bit crazy to pick anyone but Florida. I believe that Florida is sort of like the trendy overall pick to, like in Vegas. I know that, people are, just want to make sure that Cooper Flagg is himself. But pending that, I think Florida is like the next pick after the Blue Devils. That's who I'm picking to win that region. Donald?
Yeah, I got Florida as well. They're playing really, really high level right now. They've been doing it all year. And it's funny, they've kind of, in a way, flown under the radar somewhat, considering the fact that they always talk about how great Auburn is and how historic a season Auburn was having offensively. Florida has been right there lockstep with them.
All right, Scott. 3 for 3?
I'm picking Florida as well, which means they're definitely going down early. It's the curse when y'all pick them. I think the whole College Game Day crew picked them to win the national title the post. So this one's going down in flames. I wasn't sold on Florida until this weekend. They looked like a complete basketball team in the SEC tournament this weekend. And I don't think that St. John's is going to scare them all that much.
All right. Let's go to our lower seeded teams in that region that we think, got to be a 5 seed or lower, make it to the Elite 8. Who you got, Scott?
I'm going with Drake. Partially just because I think they're one of the greatest stories that no one's ever heard of in the college basketball season.
It's such a good story.
They're a D2 team that up transferred and decided to annihilate D1 competition. I think there's something to be said for teams that win. The Drake, what's their mascot? I think they're also the Bulldogs. The Drake Bulldogs are 30-3. The Drake Bulldogs are the only team.
Record. Yeah.
They're the only team in the field that has as few losses as Duke does. That means something. And this is also a team that's played a lot together. 4 of their guys came up with their coach from D2. This is a team that's played a lot of basketball together. They're old. Those are things that are dangerous in March.
Donald, what do you say?
Call me crazy, but I got the winner of Kansas and Arkansas. And I think, look, I think that bottom half of the bracket, right? You have Bill Self, you have John Calipari, and you have Rick Pitino, 3 great coaches, all of whom have coached in Final Fours, all of whom have been in national title games and won national championships. I think that's incredible. But I do think that Kansas and Arkansas is getting Boogie Flam back for the tournament, so they'll be a little bit stronger. And then Kansas, they've had a difficult year, but I know we saw them play, right? And I feel like they're just a team that if they wake up, they can be one of the better teams in the country. They can be worthy of top 2, top 3 ranking or number 1 ranking that they had earlier in the season.
Preseason number 1. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So they're a team that if they wake up, they can play like that. They can get to the Elite
8. So my team that I think could surprise as a double-digit seed, and also my team that I think is lower than the 5 seed that could make the Elite 8. Both of those are Arkansas, and it's because Boogie Fland, is supposedly is going to be back, and to me he's a hell of a player, and I think it just changes the complexion of that team in a pretty big way. And they got old guys who've been in the tournament before and know how to win in the tournament, and they are super, super talented. It's one of the best rosters that money could buy, even though it's had a tough season. I wonder if maybe it's going to finally come together for them. I'm not a fan of John Calipari, but that Arkansas I'm taking for both of my picks. Scott, who is your double-digit seed that you like to make it to the Sweet 16?
Well, so I think I inverted it here. I think Drake's going to make it to the Sweet 16, but another upset-minded team that I think could win, double-digit seed that I think could win their first game is Colorado State. I think another one of those players that, again, profiles as the jump onto the scene guy is Nick Clifford. He averages 19 points a game on 40% three-point shooting. He's almost has a Cooper flag. He almost leads Colorado State in every major category. He is 0.1 blocks per game behind one of his teammates from leading Colorado State in points, rebounds, assists, steals, and blocks. He's 6'6". He's got size and can shoot. Those are the type of guys that explode on the scene. And also, Memphis is very vulnerable.
Super inconsistent. I was going to say, picking against Memphis is never bad. Memphis may embarrass you. They may beat you by 20, but they may also just not show up.
And if Tyrese Hunter is out, and it sounds like it's unknown how serious his injury is, they become even more vulnerable.
All right, Donald, double-digit seed time. Who you got?
Scott had him for the other pick we had, the surprise. It's Drake.
Yeah. Guys, do we want to go ahead and I sort of feel like we don't even need to. Who do you think is going to win it all? We're all going to say Duke. This is a Duke podcast. The Duke Blue Devils have been the best team in college basketball for a couple months now. Right? I mean, do any of you think anyone but Duke's going to win the title?
No, this is the Homer podcast.
Yeah, even if it wasn't a Homer podcast, the money, Las Vegas says Duke's going to win the title. Who do you think they will be playing in the national title game? Scott?
Florida. I think that Florida and Auburn are probably the second and third best team in the country, but Florida's playing better right now. So give me the team that's hot coming into March.
Donald?
Right now, I got Florida. I don't know if I'm married to that pick, but right now I got Florida.
Yeah, let's make it 3 for 3. I'm inclined to agree with you guys.
And Norfolk State wins in the 16-1.
Please have that. Not against us. Anybody else?
All right, before we go, I do want to very quickly touch on the women's bracket where the Duke Blue Devils earned a number 2 seed. A little bit of a surprise. I'd looked at a lot of the bracket projections and the such. I thought Duke was going to be a number 3. I think it shows that the women's selection committee actually pays attention to conference tournaments. Scott, shout out to Scott at the beginning of the show. The men's, winning a men's tournament apparently doesn't matter. Winning a women's tournament does matter. The Blue Devils win the ACC title, and as a result, I think that's why they are a number 2 seed in the Birmingham region. They're in the same region with South Carolina. South Carolina's really good. Really, really good. But Donald, tell me what else you got. I know you've been looking at the women's bracket.
Yeah. Well, first of all, it's kind of weird, right? Because I think there's a few teams that were devalued, and it was teams in the ACC, and which was weird because the ACC was a very strong conference this year on the women's side. But Duke is in the 2 seed. Everyone jump scare. Duke will be playing Lehigh in the 215 matchup in the first round. So let's get everything that you need to do. The sage the chat, whatever you need to do. Hopefully this goes better this time around. But Duke obviously will be playing at Cameron Indoor Stadium, which will be the difference here. So if you're in Durham, get to Cameron. Also get to Raleigh because they're both guys are going to be playing in the same place, both teams, which will be great. The one thing that's interesting is you mentioned the 1 seed in that bracket is South Carolina. The number 4 seed is Maryland, who we faced up here. We lost by like 10, I want to say, in College Park. The number 3 seed.
Oh man,
I don't
even want to hear this. Oh my God,
it's UNC, and that's very interesting. For one, it obviously sets up in the Sweet 16. It sets up a matchup that I'm sure ratings would be through the roof for them. But it's interesting that they put UNC in this bracket as a 3 seed. I'm not saying that UNC did deserve a 3 seed because I think they did. But I was thinking that they'd put them in another bracket somewhere where they wouldn't have to have this matchup in a Sweet 16.
It's bizarre that they did this because, like, if you look in the Spokane bracket, the Western bracket, there isn't a single ACC team there. They didn't have to put a number 2 seed from the ACC and a number 3 seed from the ACC, let alone Duke and UNC. They didn't have to put them where they would face each other in the Sweet 16.
Yeah, you mean the Spokane 4 bracket, the Spokane 1 bracket does have Georgia Tech in there. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. I just saw. Yeah. Why the hell did they have...
the women's bracket does it where they have Birmingham and Spokane as sites, and then they have 2 brackets with each.
They're confusing the hell out of me with this. Yeah. What, you don't have cities that you can... This is women. Come on, give them some respect.
That's going to be. I got to think that's going to be changing soon. With the way the women's game is exploding, this have 2 brackets in one city, that's going to be gone in the next.
Yeah, this is something they've done the last few years since I believe since COVID, and they've done it kind of again to kind of centralize operations. But I think with the popularity of the women's game, this will be something that is going to change very, very soon.
So one thing that I think we talked about, the difference between the women's selection committee and the men's selection committee. Here's another data point on that front. The final number 1 seed came down to USC and UConn. I think that most women's basketball experts think that UConn is the better team right now. They've got the better coach. They have the better track record. By the way, Sarah Strong from Durham is the next star of the women's game. It's a shame that she didn't end up at Duke, but I get to watch her here in stores. UConn was better in the net, but UConn lost to USC. The head-to-head matchup mattered. USC beat UConn in Hartford early in the season. USC got that final number 1 seed over UConn. That is another differentiator between the 2 committees, and I think that's the way it should go. Head-to-head has to mean something. Winning the games has to mean something. UConn can say all they want, but they didn't beat USC and they had the chance. They get seated below them.
And it worked out again for Duke, right? We got the 2 seed because we beat NC State, who was also a 2. We also beat Notre Dame, who fell to a 3 in this tournament because of the fact they didn't win the conference tournament. I will also say a note, and Scott's a little biased, right? Because you're up there in UConn territory, but this season most people kind of said that there were 5 number 1 seeds for 4 spots, and it was down to USC and UConn. I think the other thing about it is, yes, UConn is a great team. USC also has the presumed player of the year in Juju Watkins, who is absolutely incredible and absolutely. But they also have Paige Beckers, right, who is the presumed number 1 pick in the WNBA draft after the season's over. Make no mistake, they had, I'm sure they had trouble going back and forth. But Scott, I do believe that in the women's game, they have said if you guys are playing each other, which I think all these teams are, right, like. They talk about South Carolina.
The top women tend to play each other more than the men do. Yeah,
yep. They schedule those non-conferences because they want that competition. But also, even in the conferences, right? South Carolina was ranked ahead of Texas. Texas was a number 1 seed, but Texas and South Carolina, they played 3 times, right? So they had those back and forth battles. LSU, the same thing, right? They have these battles where some of these big clubs or big programs play each other, and I think that is valued a lot more on that side because they can just look and go, okay, South Carolina played UConn, who won? Okay, great. Let's adjust accordingly.
The other thing is, I don't know that there's that big a difference in being the 4th number 1 and the 1st number 2. They're in the same region together. Frankly, the women's game isn't. It's more stratified, I should say, than the men's game. You don't like in the men's game, there tend to be more upsets earlier in the tournament. In the women's game, both because they play on their home floor and because I think the women's game is there's just not as much depth of quality players all across the sport. You don't tend to have as many upsets. And as a result, I think there's a fairly good chance that there's not much material difference in being a number 1 or number 2, at least in that one bracket.
What I will say that the very first 16 seed to beat a 1 seed was Stanford, losing to Harvard in 1998. So like 20 years before UMBC ever stepped foot on a court against Virginia.
Nice history lesson there. Thank you very much, sir. With that, we're going to call it quits on this edition of the DBR podcast. By the way, guys, while we were recording, John Shire went on ESPN and said that he expects Cooper Flagg to play in Duke's opening game, the 1-16 matchup against the winner of American and Mount St. Mary's. Hey, the DBR podcast, believe it or not, get ready for this. We're going to take a break tomorrow.
Are we?
Gasp.
Don't Jason, don't say that because you're going to curse us. Some news is going to come down.
God,
and we're going to have to report on it. So
at the moment, the plan is for Donald and I.
We plan on it.
The plan is for the 2 of us to be here Wednesday evening after the American Mount St. Mary's game to give you all a preview of who Duke's first opponent will be. We'll wait until after they play. I know Duke's going to do scouting on both the teams. We may take it a little easy, not do too much scouting prior to knowing who we're going to be playing. Don't forget, folks, reach out to us. Give us your Final Four picks. I'd love to. Hey, if you got an unusual pick, I'd love to hear about it. Send it to us. dbrpodcast@gmail.com. I want to thank Scott Rich, the sixth man of the year. Well, what other,
the man of very many podcast guest star names, none of which has actually stuck.
Scott, thanks for joining us, providing so much knowledge. He is Donald. I'm Jason. And Duke is headed to Raleigh. Here's the Duke band to play us out and take us home.